Welcome to the CBP Spring Virtual Conference. Whipfly is proud to be a CBP partner and presenting sponsor. I'm TJ O'Neill, also known as the Thirsty CPA, and help lead our firm's craft brewery team. We offer a full lineup of solutions, including accounting and tax, digital strategies, business advisory, and strategic planning services. Our firm's been working with breweries, wineries, and distilleries for decades. So whether you're a startup or looking to expand, we just might surprise you with a new perspective to transform your business. You can learn more at whipfly.com. Remember, that's Whipfly, W-I-P-F-L-I, not Whipfly. I hope you're enjoying the conference. Cheers.
All right, everybody, we're going to launch right on in here. Thank you to my three guests for joining. The title of our presentation today is Beyond Great Beer, Establishing a Winning Brand Presence. And that's going to be, we're going to talk a little bit about branding. We're going to talk a little bit about storytelling, authenticity. I would love to dive right into it. The three amigos here, I'm going to go around the room and let y'all introduce yourselves. We'll start with Paul, and then we'll go to Matt, and then Devin. Why don't you kick it off, Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Bryant. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me. My career started in CPG at companies like Nestle and S.C. Johnson. I landed in the beer business in 2005 with Miller Brewing Company. Spent a few years there. Then I was vice president of marketing at Constellation Brands, where I oversaw brands like Modelo, Pacifico, Negro Modelo. Then over to South Africa, back with SAB, where I was the general manager in Johannesburg for global premium brands. Then I returned to North America as the president of SAB Miller Canada. That all ended when ABI bought us out in 2016, and I returned to the U.S. Molson Coors. My last job there was the head of 10th and Blank, which is the craft beer division of Molson Coors, and then I left in 2 years ago now, actually, to take the helm at Wisconsin Brewing Company and see if I can't help a small business get big. So that's what I'm doing now.
All right, Matt.
Well, I'm Matt Tanaka. I run Stout Collective. We're a beer branding and design studio based in Chicago. I got my start in the beer business about 15 years ago working at the different wholesalers. So I started doing like event programming, social media, marketing, and like all of the 100,000 things you do when you work at a wholesaler. I got my start there. I started Stout in 2015 as a way to help a lot of the breweries that I was working with write marketing strategies and improve their design and brand strategy. And it's kind of grown since there. Now we are 10 folks spread out across the states. We get to work with breweries sort of all different sizes, tiny little startups to giant national brands. It's been a wild ride, but super fun. Thanks for having me today. I'm stoked to talk to you all.
What's going on, everybody? My name is Devin Quinn. A lot of folks in the industry call me DQ. I currently work as the national brand manager for Dogfish Head Beer, which is pretty rad. Kind of a dream job for me. I got started in the industry back when I was in grad school, working with Down East Cider House as a taproom ambassador and a brand ambassador. Springboarded up to Vermont to go become marketing manager for Stowe Cider. And then I got to become marketing director out in Colorado for WeldWorks Brewing. And that's where I got in touch with Bryant and Full Pour Media. Stoked to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Thrilled to talk about Dogfish Head and chat with the rest of the group here.
Absolutely. And on the topic of WeldWorks, we had Lauren Kale as well scheduled. She unfortunately had a personal emergency earlier this morning and headed back out. But I'm looking forward to connecting with her. And obviously, if anyone's not familiar with the great things that she's doing in Colorado up at WeldWorks, highly recommend checking out their Instagram. Their socials are top notch. High level here for everybody watching the stream. The synopsis, kind of the topics we're going to cover today. The idea that it's no longer enough to use good beer, good atmosphere as your only marketing strategy, especially nowadays as the market matures and the curve kind of starts to flatten. Craft breweries are facing a unique challenge as they grow and even as they start up. That is, how to be authentic, how to authentically convey their story, preserve their identity, whether in the face of expansion or just kind of in the face of this maturing market. So we're really going to dive in with these brewery branding badasses, kind of the art of kind of, developing that genuine message that's going to resonate with your loyal folks, your regulars, as well as new audiences. So first off, again, we're talking about two very key things here: authenticity and storytelling. So starting off with authenticity, we'll go around the room. I'll kind of cue each of you as needed, but let's start off with Paul. The question for everyone being, how do you define authenticity in the context of craft beer, in the context of craft beer branding, and why is that so essential for success in today's market? Paul?
Yeah, this is a very common question, an important one too. So to me, it's about just being genuine and true to the origin of your brand and not bullshitting your way into trying to become relevant. That's the thing that people see right through, So it's about knowing where you come from and how you turn that authentic bit of information into a story that then resonates with people. But the harder you try, the worse it's going to be. It should come naturally. If this authenticity is not derived or contrived. It's in and of itself. It's just something that's genuine and real. So it's really important to know. It doesn't matter if your brand's been around for 20 years or 2 weeks. There's something there that got this thing going, and that's what you need to kind of tease out and figure out what's relevant about. So, like I said, it's the opposite of authenticity is bullshitting yourself into relevance, which never works.
I love that. I love that idea that it's not bullshitting. It's like such a temptation when you look at trends or things that are happening. You look at a billion other brands or breweries that are doing cool stuff, and you're like, I want to do that cool thing. But yeah, a lot of the times it would feel false to just jump on something because it's something that would be cool.
Yeah,
it feels inauthentic. And
it's more important than ever. You could almost say anything you wanted 15 years ago, and you would grow. Now, I hate to say it, but there's just too many options now. 9,000.
Yeah.
We're still not to the point where closings and openings are offset much. So there's still 9,000 competitors. If you're not authentic and real and have something to say that's relevant, then it's going to be painful.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there was a point where it was like being new or having beer was enough to get recognized and start selling. And then we kind of got past the new phase. I agree. It's a lot more challenging right now.
Yeah, Devin, just kind of speaking on the large brand side, having worked with WeldWorks, now over at Boston, heading up the Dogfish Head side, you came into your current role, obviously with that brand, that train's been moving, right? I mean, that train's been moving, and obviously they're always still looking for new markets, new penetrations, whether it's with their current products or not. Talk to us a little bit about your experience with maintaining the authenticity that's already there, and maybe getting into new markets or getting into new products, if that kind of factors in right now.
Sure. I'm really lucky to work with and learn from a lot of founder owners in my career. Sam and Mariah Calgione, both co-founders of Dogfish Head, kind of heroes in craft beer for me, has been a really cool experience to learn from. And Sam and Mariah both really instilled 3 core tenets to me, which have been quality, consistency, and continuing to be well differentiated. So everything Dogfish Head does comes from those 3 pillars. We do it under this lens of exploring goodness. And we've always sort of had that guiding quote from our we've had this Emerson quote that kind of charges Dogfish Head coworkers to explore goodness and do so confidently and boldly. So we've always been brewing beers with culinary ingredients. Way back in the day, we kind of went against the Reinheitsgebot to be hey, look at what else beer could be. So we've always sort of been playing in that innovative space since our foundation, and definitely been pushing the boundaries. So that's thankfully been a space that I've always enjoyed throughout my career too. So it was kind of a seamless fit. However, when we start looking at, hey, should Dogfish Head go into this new trend, or should we explore these things? We always do kind of measure it. Sort of what Paul and Matt were getting at, hey, is this something that we as a brand should be doing? Or instead of looking at it like there's 9,000 other like collaborators in this space of craft beer. So for instance, like, hey, if like our pals at Cohesion could do this pills a little bit better, let's have them kind of do that space versus, hey, like continually hopping's been a big space for us. So is there something we could do here that's very meaningful, very intrinsic to who we are, and bring that out? So a great example of this for us was, hey, we saw this like high ABV, like super juicy kind of trend popping up in craft beer. But instead of like making something like one of our collaborators in the space is already doing, we kind of went back to our roots of Squall IPA that was continually hopped, like using Cascade hops. We came out with Citrus Squall, where it has like real fruit juice from grapefruits. We used blue agave nectar and some fresh lime peel, and used Cascade hops within that to make Citrus Squall. So it was our way to like go to this cool trend, but do so in a way that was like very much us, very culinary inspired, and still felt well differentiated enough that we weren't kind of trying to copycat what other folks were finding success with, but we wanted to bring something in addition to that space. Well, we also created the style of a double golden ale. It didn't exist either. So that was pretty fun too. That came out right as I was joining the team. So it's been a really wild ride with Squall to kind of bring that and have it find its place within portfolios.
I feel like creating a style like that, especially that specific style, feels like very Dogfish. Like it feels like a really appropriate example of how brand matters. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it feels really special that like consumers trust us to do that. And I think it comes from this place of like, hey, Sam and Mariah were kind of out there when craft beer was young in a lot of ways. And since joining Boston Beer, we've kept that spirit alive. Like obviously, Jim Cook, very much an innovator and a leader in this space too. So it's been great to have that kind of push behind us to continue to move forward. And there's no like real restrictions there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm here at a conference now, meeting with a handful of brand new breweries, maybe 1-2 years old. There's a handful who are maybe a little bit older. And what I'm really trying to stress right now is what all of you have been talking about, which is knowing who you are from the jump, from the get-go, laying that like super solid foundation of this is who our brand is, like brand persona, doing some brand persona work, doing just some brand strategy work around like, this is our line in the sand. This is the way that we're rowing. This is what's most important to us. Because otherwise you're just chasing trends. You're doing sours because sours are fun, or selling, and you're just doing trend chasing. And nowadays, when more and more breweries are closing, as Paul's point, it's not quite at that tipping point yet, but it's becoming more and more common. It is also becoming more and more common to need to know who you are as a brand from the jump, from the get-go. I'd love to go around a little bit and talk. Obviously, Matt, you work with fledgling breweries doing that. Paul, in the past, I remember hearing a podcast about kind of, being the first one on the UFC sponsor, whatever it is, from your past and even from Devin as well. I would love to hear all three of your experiences, examples with founding that, or just kind of creating that line in the sand for a specific brand, because a lot of folks today who are watching this stream are going to be newish, brand new, or some kind of go around the room a little bit and tell us your experience with creating brand personas.
Yeah, you reminded me of the Mickey story, huh? So that wasn't on my list to talk about, but now I feel I have to.
I want to know the story.
Everyone's favorite brand, Mickey's. Mickey's has always been edgy and fun and crazy and little party-ish. And the story there is we knew what the brand stood for. We were trying to figure out, how do you make a brand that not one distributor wants to actually interact with or touch because it's not that vague or interesting? Like how do you bring that to life? And we said, well, we're going to keep it out of the distributor's hands. We're going to create a world around Mickey's that they have no choice but to deal with. So I sent the brand manager out to Southern California for a week, and he came back and said, here's what I learned. 2 things. Every Mickey's drinker, 1, smokes weed, 2, watches the UFC. So at the time, we couldn't do anything about the weed thing, but we contacted the UFC, and we were the first beer brand ever to sponsor. If you remember back in 2006-07, the Mickey's logo was on the octagon, and we signed fighters. We put fighters on the cans, like 16-ounce, 24-ounce cans. Again, the thought was distributors aren't going to do marketing for us. They're going to deliver beer. So on a brand like that, right? So the marketing was tied to the brand, and you couldn't sell Mickey's in a 16-ounce can without talking about the UFC because it was right there. So that was just understanding our brand, what the brand was about, learning something about the consumers, and then putting it all together in a program that made sense. And believe it or not, Mickey's had like some of its best years in that era. And when we had a lot of fun with it. The other brand I was going to talk about was, which I worked on at Constellation, to this day, probably my favorite brand I've ever worked on is Pacifico. You know, I think there's a lot of people either watching or even on this panel nodding their head because it's just a cool brand and it's super authentic to its origin, which is, and I spent a lot of time understanding the origin, but discovered by Southern Cal surfers in Baja California and brought back to San Diego when they returned home. That's how it started. To this day, San Diego is the heartbeat and heart and soul of the Pacifico brand, but it's actually sold across the country, continues to grow. Everything, there's a thread, you can run a thread in that brand's history from the time it started all the way through today, and it would be a common thread of this discovery, this adventure mindset, this if Corona is white sandy beaches and chilling, Pacifico is sand in your shorts and sweating. So
I love that Mickey's example too. I think what's really interesting about that is like, I think when smaller little like startup brands or breweries think about larger brands, there's like this picture of like big user studies and like a bunch of data gathering and lots of suits in a room making decisions. And sometimes that is true, but like good leadership, even at that level, a lot of times is gut instinct and knowing your audience and listening. So like your example of one person, you sent one person to like inundate themselves in that world. And you said, okay, what did you hear? 2 things. And then like the brand trusted that instinct. Yeah. At that point, that's like, that takes guts. And the stakes are so much higher with a brand like that, where you're like, all right, we heard these 2 things, we're going all in. It wasn't user tested to death, I imagine. It was like, this is the instinct, you hear it and go. And then the second thing I heard from that's really awesome is you can make that quick decision. Like you can make that gut decision because you had a really good feeling for what was an appropriate partnership for that brand. So like, okay, we hear weed, we hear UFC. I know that UFC is like an appropriate sponsorship for who they are. It might not be appropriate for like Dogfish Head. It maybe isn't appropriate for that, but it is appropriate for Mickey's. And because you have that really firm understanding, you were able to go with it. I guess I'd love to hear a little bit more about that experience, about listening to that, making that decision. Was that like, did that feel like a risk at the time, or did it feel like this is right, let's go on and go do it?
Yeah, so we're operating within Miller Brewing Company, right? And Miller's having a resurgence, and Miller Lite is starting to catch fire again. And we had under new leadership of SAB, all that stuff. So the cool thing about working in that division is no one was really paying attention to us. And that's
you're flying under the radar.
Yeah, we're under the radar, and so we have a small budget, not much. The budgets at companies like that, I've also learned through a lot of hard work. Budgets follow good ideas. So we said we need a good idea. So then the actual question on risk is like, what are we risking actually? Like we don't do anything today. We sell it in single serve cans and grenades at a very low price, and it's a malt liquor, and it's got this heritage and history that no one's even thought about in a while. So to us, it was not that risky. And again, flying under the radar, had a lot more rope to do things. As soon as the program becomes official, then you start getting the scrutiny like UFC. Oh my God, that's dangerous. There's blood on the mat. Like we got this. We're fine. Like it's Mickey's. No one, it's not going to damage Miller Lite. So we're fine. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Devin, on your end, Boston beer side, you kind of touched on it, and actually that's what inspired me to ask that follow-up question. But anything else that kind of follows that thread?
Completely. And I think actually when you talk about the example of Pacifico versus Corona, where you kind of like, you're looking at that similar space where it's a really popular style, it's really blowing up, and it's an exciting portion of like the beer market right now. Those are 2 really authentic, seminal brands that are going after like the same opportunity in very well-defined and thoughtfully like through the line ways. So similar to how like, yeah, like there's that white sandy beach version versus like, hey, there's sand in your shorts. I think when you find it's kind of, Brian, you use the term like line in the sand, where like, yeah, it kind of like swerves a little bit. Like perhaps there's an area where you like budge over it or you get to tease out that edge sort of. But finding your seminal like core roots and your guiding statements, like, and the Boston beer world, it's really wonderful for me to see like, hey, we do have budgets for research. And I'm really lucky and thankful that I get to work with like a really talented group of coworkers and consumer insight analysts and have resources that I didn't necessarily have when I was in more scrappier units. But it's really nice to see how similar those brainstorms and those decision-making processes still are compared to when it was me up in rural Vermont with like a team of 2 other folks and the co-founder in a room sort of being like, hey, like, who's our consumer? What are we like? If you almost treat them and make decisions like they're in the room with you and they get excited when you make those decisions. And if you can feel that excitement come from them, that's when you know you're still coming from a really authentic, strong place. So I think a good way to look at it is we have like a key insight that we like to develop and work around and like flush that out. And whether or not that's actually data backed or research backed, or if it's just something you might notice like from a narrative perspective when you're spending time in the industry or you're spending time with folks in where you think your core consumer spends time, what's that key insight and what's that reason to believe behind the key insight? When you go from places that are really rooted in like who you are, who you want to show up to for your consumers, and you have a strong belief in that, it carries through the line really authentically. And folks can then like really sink their teeth into it and really like come alongside you to become the brand ambassadors that you want them to be. Because you're right, like we want like Boston Beer, we love our distributors. Every brewery should love your distributor. Like they are kind of your like first customer in a lot of ways. However, like as someone who works for a brewery, like you are also like the brand manager, you are the brand director at the same time. So like how you're marketing it, if it's easy for consumers to dig in and like pick up the flag with you, that almost like triples or doubles or quadruples your brand ambassadorship base. So if it's something that they feel proud to be a part of and carry with them, you're kind of getting like a free additional sales force, which supplements and supports the wonderful folks who work at your distributors as well.
I love that. I have an example from a small brewery side that speaks to that, but the idea of treating your consumers as like picking up the flag of the brand, like if you can speak to them and they get it, that's super powerful. We were working with a brewery in Orlando. They were just about to open. We were doing some brand strategy and then design for them. This is like an oversimplification of Orlando, but we'd like to think of it as like Disney and dive bars. It's this like world of like 2 extremes. There's like the uber polished Disney tourist side, and then there's like local Orlando, which is like smoking inside the bars and don't drink draft beer, just get the can out of the thing because the lines maybe haven't been cleaned in 10 years, that kind of thing. And there's like a ton of authenticity in that. And with the brand, the owners of it were, they had this like decision sort of tension point of like, okay, well, we come from this world. They're like bikers, tattoo, like love, like the grit of Orlando. But we want to be this place that's friendly. And when like the families come in for Disney and they do one cool local thing that the grownups actually get to enjoy, we want them to come here. Like, how do we do that? And they're kind of a little bit nervous about going too far in on the who they are thing because they want to reach the tourist. And then I had this great conversation with one of the investors. He described himself as a square. He was like a real estate guy, older dude, and was like, I'm like really not cool. I'm like, I don't like all this loud music. I don't have any tattoos. This is not my thing. But he's like, I want to sit in a bar that has like loud music and tattoos and stuff and feel cool for a couple minutes. Like I want to step into that culture because it feels real for who they are. And in some ways that's actually more powerful because like, I know it's not fake in this world of Disney and dive bars. Like I know this is like a real thing for real people. It's not my personal thing, but I get to experience it for an hour and have a couple beers and like taste that culture. And that ends up being more powerful. So that's kind of what we went in with on the brand and made this decision. Okay, like be yourself, who you are, communicate it in a way that's not threatening or that's not mean, and it'll welcome other people because they want to be a part of that thing. To your point of like picking up the flag is like people recognize authenticity. They recognize when people are doing things that are real and that they believe in and that are who they are. And that itself is sometimes more powerful than trying to speak to everyone at the same time.
Awesome. No, I love that. I love the small and large interplay there. Absolutely. And even, now at this conference that I'm currently at, I'm talking about lines in the sand. I'm talking about staying true to who you are. I think there's a lot of people out there, though, who say, okay, so we're an ecologically friendly craft brewery who's big on sustainability and this and that. Now, how the hell do we communicate that to people? Like, how, in what way will we post to social and email? So there's the storytelling side of it as well. There's being authentic, there's knowing who you are, but then boots on the ground or tire meets the road, any metaphor you like to use. Like, how do I realize that? How do I make that tangible for people? So there's that storytelling part of it as well. So I'd love for all of you to kind of go through and share some of your kind of real world examples of, here's how we actually executed. Here's how we made this a tangible thing. Here's how we brought that story to life in the community. It's so easy to conceptualize. How do you make it tangible?
Yeah,
let's go.
Yeah, an authentic, relevant, differentiated, all these things we talked about, positioning. It's the backbone of the entire brand, whether it's a brewery or a brand or a sub, whatever it is. And off that backbone, everything branches, right? So it's the filter for all decision making, has to be. And so we talked about it earlier. Devin brought up a great point. It's like, there's a new trend. How do I get into that? Well, or do I get into it? Maybe the question isn't, do I get into it? But I know my brand. I am going to get into it. How would we do it? Right.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
Storytelling isn't just literally storytelling. Like, here's a story about our brand. It was founded in,
right.
It's actually, that's part of it, but also the way it looks, the way you behave, your attitude on social media. Do you talk shit? Are you serious? Are you earnest? Are you like us, whimsical and what we call lakeside levity? Lake Louie, we
I love that.
completely revamped the entire brand 2 years ago or a year ago, but we spent a third of the time understanding what the brand's all about. We spend a third of the time working on creative executions of it and how it's going to look and feel and brand positioning. And then we've spent a third of the time executing the shit out of it across everything we do. And so brand storytelling is literally the 360 degrees around your brand and everything that you do. And actually what the beauty of a good brand story and a good heritage and a good positioning is not just the ability to say yes and how are we going to do it, but actually the ability to say no.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people say yes way too often, and then the brand gets convoluted, the brand gets overly spread thin, and it starts losing any kind of meaning. So a good execution in this space is really the ability to say no more so than it is the ability to say yes, actually, in my opinion.
Sure.
Yeah, if I could just hop on after what Paul was saying there, like I kind of try to keep this guiding tenet of you could mean like everything to a certain group of people, or you could kind of mean nothing to everybody at the same time. And like, you really have to thoughtfully choose your scope and like, where are those areas that you feel very like called to be in? And like using your example, Brian, of like sustainability, like Dogfish Head, we're coming up on 30 years in 2025. Like we've always been like pretty community focused. We've always been really focused in on, especially what happens here in coastal Delaware. And prior to partnering with Boston Beer, like Mariah really headed up this wonderful program of beer and benevolence. And we've always had this tie to support the community and give back to especially local Delaware, but also on a national level. So a portion of Dogfish Head Beer's national sales still go to this beer and benevolence program. And it's always been a part of us. It's always been there. And we've played around with like, hey, how do we bring this to a national level? Does it go to a national level? How do we keep it more tied to like our core stuff? And we still do 4 annual releases, or 4 or 3. I think it's 4.
It's up to you, Devin. You're the boss.
Yeah.
I suppose it
we'll all believe anything you say anyway.
Well, we do releases through the beer and benevolence program that are come out of our Delaware properties here. And with those, we always pick like partners thoughtfully that tie into like how we've always gone to the community. So we typically partner with more environmentally focused organizations, things that support and nourish the arts as well. And because we've continually stayed through those pieces, it not only gives like credence to our work because we're still going back to how we've always supported, but it also allows us to spotlight and really champion other partners in the space who, instead of like just us partnering with like anyone who comes to us, like we purposely reach out to these groups and like choose to work with them because we see them coming alongside us to advance the work that we're already doing. And we know that our money and like our support and the support of our consumers and our guests who come to our properties are going to that thoughtful place too. And we know that it means more to like our greater audience because we specifically want to be a big voice in this area. And I think by retaining that kind of authenticity, like and tying those bits of storytelling continually into how we come to market, how we come and talk to our consumers and welcome them into our spaces. Like there's always bits of beer and benevolence in what we do. It just continually tells that story almost on like a 365, very natural pace. So it's not just like out of nowhere, we're like, hey, boom, like post about the, like, hey, we donated this amount of money. It's more so like, hey, here's how we're engaging. Here's how we're bringing our coworkers to go spend their time at this. Like every Boston Beer employee is invited to like beer and benevolence days that happen every quarter. So we all like we shut our laptops, we go out into the communities and we really engage, like roll up our sleeves and get amongst it, which is really great. And we don't share those stories to be like, hey, look at us. It's more like, hey, like come join us, which has been really fun.
Yeah. Love that.
I think storytelling, I think there's some great points from both of you, because storytelling itself in marketing is kind of a loaded word. It's like there's a lot of pressure to say a lot because of it. I think, Paul, you said something to this. I think, Devin, you also said something to this too, but like sometimes saying less is saying more. Paul, you said saying no. Devin, you were talking about like being everything to someone is more important than being nothing to everyone. A lot of that is like having a lot of patience. I think a good example is probably the most patient brand in the beer business is Allagash. Like everything they do is so, I think, quiet and thoughtful and reflective. And like, think about how much Allagash White has changed in the last 20 years. Not at all. And the packaging update in it in 2019 felt like a big departure, but it was the original artist that did all of that stuff. I think this is best reflected in just their Instagram account. Like if you just look at the photos they post, it's all about the quiet beauty of Maine. Like yes, the beer gets talked about. Yes, the people behind it get talked about. But in general, it just feels like the beauty of Maine in a way that is so like quiet and reflective. Like if you go through it, you won't, for example, you won't ever find a like snowmobile in motion. You might find a snowmobile parked. You would never find someone like skiing. You might see skis by the side of like on like in the snow. It's just about like patience. If you talk to them, like what they talk about is they want people when they see that to just feel relaxed, like feel this like breath out. Like if you're in rural Maine and you step out on your snowshoes into the woods, that feeling of like shedding everything. And that I think is a great example of authenticity that you cannot buy. You cannot manufacture that. Like they do because they live and breathe Maine and have forever. More than that, it's like a really good example of understanding who you are and then not bowing to the pressure of having to say a lot of things all the time. Just saying one thing very clearly, very slowly, very consistently. So when you think about Allagash, I think probably everybody who's listening has like a general version of the same thing. It's Allagash White, and then like, God, Maine is so fucking beautiful. Like that's what you hold with that brand.
Yeah.
And Matt,
and even on a small level.
What's that?
Go ahead, Devin.
I was just gonna like just be like, oh, and to one more point about your point about Allagash. Like, first of all, Rob Todd, also a hero of mine. Like spending time with him has been probably one of the highlights of my career. But seeing how like that thoughtful, patient approach comes through to like their actual operations as well, and how their operations can be storytelling. Totally. I believe it was last year they just hit 1 million pounds annually of like Maine grown grain, I want to say. And like, obviously I don't speak for Allagash, but
they increased that. They promised 1 million and went beyond it. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Like crazy. That right there is like, hey, like that's standing on your business and like on that thoughtful approach. Like they've been around for a very long time. They couldn't do that right out of the gate. And that's just been like thoughtful, personal deals that they've made and like promises to their community and their drinkers. And like by joining alongside their mission, you're enjoying Maine, you're preserving Maine, and you're preserving that way of life for all those maltsters and grain houses in Maine. So it's a really cool way to bring that storytelling in a 360 approach.
That's a good point.
And bringing this, to a digestible level too. A lot of folks, I've heard, or Matt, you kind of talked about it too. It doesn't have to be suits in a room. You don't have to have the barrelage of Allagash or Dogfish Head or Mickey's, Miller Court, whatever it is. These are important tenets to keep in mind if you're 1,000 barrels a year, 2,000 barrels a year, and even something as simple as having a PDF document on your Google Drive that says this is what our XYZ beer brand is all about. And then I think the biggest thing that people deal with is losing that message as they grow, because now I'm hiring somebody who's doing the marketing. And if you haven't, you've got all of these style, this kind of the style guide exists in your head and the brand exists in your head. But then you hire somebody and you get too busy or otherwise, and then the brand kind of shifts, and then you start to take that shotgun approach because the other person has no guidance. So one thing, taking off my moderator hat and even just being a panelist, and things that we advise brands to do is write that stuff down, have it again from the get-go. And if not, take the time to, because it's really not it's not good enough anymore to just put sensory overload labels on and distribute those out there, super neon labels anymore. It's about the brand. It's about the buy-in that your customers and your potential customers have. So on a small level, I'll put it to the three of you, like how can these smaller 1,000, 2,000 or less breweries just get started with something like this? What do you recommend, like smartest first steps? It's so easy to, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed at all these things to do. But step one would be what?
First of all, let me just say to build on your last point, there's an old adage in big brand companies. How do you know when there's a new brand manager? Because the packaging changed. So, there's just a lot, like you said, you got to write this shit down. You got to make sure it lives way beyond like any of us being around, so that there is that consistency. The people who've managed Corona over the last 40 years has changed many, many times, but the brand hasn't. And so that's actually the first step, is actually to just talk about it. If you're a small brewery without any kind of research budget, that's how we approach the Lake Louis redesign. It's like, talk to the people who've been around the brand, who've been around it since day one. What do they think about it? What's the attitude they think it had? It's really just talking about the brand, where it's been, what it's done, what's worked and what hasn't. If it's been around again, it doesn't really matter if it's been around for 6 months or 60 years. It's just, there's conversations that have to be had. And then, like you said, documentation, if you start to branch off into different ideas of how you're going to position it, again, run those by a few people. You don't need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on research. Matt talked about it earlier. You got to use your instincts. There's a reason you're doing what you're doing, and if you're the decision maker, you have to make some calls. And it's really about rolling up your sleeves and digging in and kind of trying to. It's like the funnel approach. You're going to start with a lot of information, and how do you winnow it down to something small and a nugget that you can work with? But it just takes time and a lot of conversations and iterations.
Yeah, I think that nugget thing is really important. And go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to say, it can be as simple as buy your mug club a beer, invite all of email blast your mug club out and say 50 guys and gals, come and beer, one beer on us. Let's have a conversation. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is like a kind of an unfair answer because it's incredibly difficult to do well, but I think good brands have done it well. And that's what keeps the guiding light is. Yeah. And it feels sometimes cheesy to say, but have a statement, like a catchy or pithy statement, a brand guiding statement. It's not a mission statement. It describes your brand as a feeling. You've heard a bunch of, I think, great examples from both Paul and Devin today. Like one of Paul, I'm probably going to get it wrong, but talking about Lake Louis, it was like Lakeside Luxury maybe, or what's the Lakeside Levity. Like you don't need to know anything more about the brand than hearing that statement to like get it. Like the idea of sitting by a lake probably brings up a bunch for you. Levity, the idea of like this bright, upbeat kind of maybe an approach to humor that's not like over the top funny, but more about like lighthearted. Like there's just a bunch in there. You get it. Devin, this is Dogfish Head, but exploring goodness and those kinds of phrases like that it's a really guiding statement. One of the ones we use for that brand that I talked about in Orlando is creepy cute. Like, how do you know something feels right for this brand? It's creepy cute. Like it's a content that's really dark and heavy. There's a lot of like zombies and like really dark imagery, but it's presented in a way that's really fun and cute. And that is like a good measure for what makes a good idea for that brand. The approach to doing that, there's a million ways to do it, but you can do it with no budget and you can do it with a giant budget. It just takes time and like attention. like the funnel thing that Paul said, is like starting with big conversations, about a lot of stuff. For us, we generally recommend, okay, talk about your values and what matters to you. Talk about like the stories that you want to tell, or your brand tenets or keywords, and then summarize it. And the actually best thing that you can do is start to explain it to as many people as you can. Just force yourself to talk about it. And as you talk about it, you'll start to recognize yourself saying certain things that are like, oh, I keep saying this. I don't know what it means, but I keep saying this. So it's probably something important there. So like sit down and write, talk to your other stakeholders, explain it till you can get to some sort of statement. Those statements are really hard, but they do a lot more sometimes for explaining a brand. Another one that we use is to find a brand muse. So instead of having a statement that summarizes who you are, you could have a person, generally somebody that a lot of people know. There's one brand, I'll keep it generally vague, but it's a giant national brand with a giant national beer. And so we gave a sort of identity to that beer, and we summarize it in Anthony Bourdain. Like the thing should feel like Anthony Bourdain. It's exploratory. It's like a little bit dangerous, but in a way that everybody who watches feels welcomed into that danger. It's never confrontational, but always like on behalf of the viewer. And there's this like punk rock ethos that grew up in it. And like, it doesn't necessarily always do punk rock things, but it approaches things from this like anti-establishment kind of mentality. It's just like finding a thing that can summarize the deeper point is really helpful.
Yeah, Matt, I think both you and Paul have really nailed this on the head, kind of like with this funnel versus this lens approach. I kind of view it, I go back and forth on viewing it as both, but when you're like bringing out something new, and let's say you're going after like an occasion, like we'll even say like using the example, Brian, you provided of like enjoying a beer in Maine and just taking two brands that I really admire, being Allagash and then Bissell Brothers. Both of them have their own distinct personalities, their own distinct portfolios, but really love the place they come from, really love celebrating those, the beauty of Maine. But the lenses they use to kind of share that story looks very different. And to enjoy those occasions of enjoying a beer in Maine is very different. So there's like the reflective, calm, enjoyable, peaceful moment versus Bissell Brothers kind of has some like punk rock, sort of like skater vibe ethos to them. So they look at it with a different lens. And it's really wonderful to see. Like both of those are very authentic, but go to the occasion and try to meet consumers who are looking for different experiences within that occasion at different points. And it allows them both to kind of have that like mind share essentially from the consumers. Like, hey, like if I'm looking for this experience, this sort of energy, I'll reach for like a Swish, versus if I'm looking for something else, I'll go reach for an Allagash White. And Dogfish Head is very big on that too. Like using our lens of like, yeah, there's a lot of ways to enjoy like sitting around a fire. But when we think about that, how would we go and do that? How would Dogfish Head come and do it? Like, is it like we kind of use it as like, hey, like Sam's there with you in some respects.
I like that.
He's ever since the foundation. Cool. And I'm actually joining in right now from the Dogfish Head Inn in coastal Delaware. We have a fire pit here, and Sam lives down the road, and he'll come down here Fridays or Saturday nights and just share some fresh beer with consumers and just talk to them. And that's kind of like,
that's awesome.
When I think about ideas, like, oh, like, so if Sam's like sitting at the fire pit, there's like 5 or 6 folks from out of town just casually dropping by. Like, how's Sam talking to them? What are they sharing with him? What are they excited about? How do they feel about this new pitch? And if they're kind of like raising their eyes and they're like really stoked about it, I feel like that's a good thing for me to chase, versus if they're kind of like, okay, that's interesting. Not in like the most enthusiastic way. I'm like, okay, I might refine that a little bit, put it back through the lens one more time to really get it funneled down and use that funnel approach that Paul was talking about. And like at the end, you get this really concise, very tight, like diamond that then you can really share, and folks will see it and immediately their eyes will catch. And then they'll essentially go back up the funnel, and that's where the broader storytelling happens. But it all happens like that final digestible point is like that core nugget that then fractals out to be so much more beautiful and in depth.
Yeah, that's cool. Great example.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for all of you. Gentlemen, thank you so much for attending, for taking, donating some time, off work, or Matt, I know you're on vacation right now as well. So, I really appreciate everybody's insight and everybody's time. I want to give each of you a handful of seconds to promote your brands, promote, what the things you're doing, folks can give you a follow on social. My name's Bryant. I'm at Full Pour Media as well, and hit it, fellas.
All right, I don't have a big plug here. There is something new and exciting coming from us. If you want to check it out at drinkroadking.com or on social medias at drinkroadking, one word.
Yep.
It's our new launch that's coming next month. Little mystery.
Great name. Very cool name.
You'll wait till you see it.
I'm looking at it right now. I promise I'm paying attention, but I'm already going to that.
Yeah. It's wild, but we're excited.
Yeah. All right, Matt and Devin. I think Matt might have frozen. So yeah, Devin hit it. DQ.
Yeah. Make sure you follow us along at dogfishhead.com. It's all one word. Beautiful place in coastal Maine. But yeah, we're in Delaware. And thanks for the invitation. Stoked to be here. Hope everyone gets a chance to explore goodness. Appreciate the time, gentlemen.
Matt?
Yeah, you can just check out what we're doing at Stout Collective, stoutcollective.com. We're on Instagram, all the places. And thanks for having me today. This was super fun.
Yeah,
Paul,
thanks,
Devin,
Brian.
I'm super inspired by the work you do and the brands you
Nice to meet you
lead.
guys.
So it was an exciting conversation.
Yeah. It was
All right,
really
fellas. Cheers. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for watching. Have a good night.
Thanks, y'all.